Chapter 34, Daniel. They stayed 2 more days. They probably should have left earlier. They both had things to do, but somehow it didn't feel wrong to stay. Vivian and Daniel still separate beds, still sharp edges, but the awkwardness had faded. Their silence was less brittle, their interactions less guarded. No fights, no speeches, just a kind of coexistence. At night, the guest suite was quiet. One bed near the window, one against the wall. They never spoke after lights out, but sometimes Daniel heard her breathing, shift, slow, steady, safe. That felt like something. Vivian didn't vanish in the mornings like she usually did. She took tea with his mother, walked with the twins in the garden. She didn't laugh, but she smiled more. Enough that Margaret Jo began making plans she never said aloud. By the second evening, Emily and Elise had braided tiny spirit charms into Vivian's hair and called it a Leju Unity ritual. Vivian hadn't stopped them. She'd even let them adjust the placement. Twice. Ryan asked for feedback on his training stances, and Vivian offered it without sarcasm. She corrected his heel pivot, realigned his grip, and nodded once when he got it right. Good, she said. Do it again. And he did. 3 times. Without stopping. Margaret insisted on teaching her the family dumpling fold, and Vivian didn't say no. Her folds weren't perfect, but she memorized the pattern. And when Margaret wasn't looking, she redid the worst one. By the time the departure carriage arrived, the farewell felt like a quiet festival. The twins ambushed her first. Emily hugged her so hard she nearly dropped her travel satchel. Elise slipped a folded talisman into her palm and whispered, "It's good luck for exams or enemies, whichever shows up first." Vivian blinked, then tucked it into her sleeve without a word. Margaret waited at the foot of the steps. When Vivian stepped forward, she pulled her in. A real embrace. Both arms. No hesitation. "I expect to see you at Winter Bloom," she said. "If I'm not in seclusion," Margaret smiled faintly. "Then I'll wait for spring." Ryan was next. He stood a little straighter than usual, hands tucked behind his back like a soldier trying not to fidget. When she turned toward him, he saluted. It was either ironic or playfully. It was earnest. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." Vivian looked at him for a moment, then reached forward and flicked the edge of his jacket. "Don't thank me until I meet Lily." Ryan blinked. "You want to?" "I want to make sure she deserves you," Vivian said. "And that she's smart enough to see what she has." Ryan flushed a deep crimson. "Also," she added lightly, "I want to hear her version of the garden incident, in detail." Daniel, standing nearby, grinned. "You're enjoying this." Vivian didn't answer. She turned back toward the carriage. One last glance at the Jo family. Then to Daniel. He didn't say anything at first, just held the door open. She paused. Not inside yet. Not gone. Claire and Caleb were already gone by then. Left early. Before breakfast. Before anyone could ask questions. Claire hadn't left a note. Caleb had. 1 line. Neatly scrawled, family obligations call. Thanks for the tea. No one said much about it. The carriage swayed gently beneath them as it cut through the veil of evening clouds. Outside, the sky faded from gold to gray, the kind of soft, hazy dusk that made the world feel half-remembered. Inside, the silence was warm. A bit heavy, but it wasn't overbearing either. It was quiet, peaceful. Vivian sat across from him, legs crossed, arms resting loosely in her lap. Light filtered through the charmed glass window, catching the edge of her braid. The jade pins shimmered like starlight. They hadn't spoken since leaving the Jo estate, but it didn't feel like she was avoiding him, just a silent contentment. Daniel leaned back into the cushions and glanced sideways. "I think my mother's going to replace one of the twins with you," he said. Vivian's lips curved. "Is that so?" "She kept offering you seconds. That's basically an adoption ceremony in the Jo household." "I accepted," she said lightly. "Bold move. I was hungry." He chuckled under his breath. "You do realize you've reset all their expectations, right? Ryan's going to ask for sword lessons. The twins are probably designing your family crest into next year's festival banners. They wouldn't be the first." Silence again, but easier now. The kind that exists between people who no longer need to pretend they don't care. Then she turned to the window, voice quieter. "What will you be doing while I'm away?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Away. I'm leaving in the morning," she said. "Lotus Peak, sword seclusion, 6 months, maybe longer." He blinked. "So that's it? One perfect weekend and a silent exit?" She didn't smile. "My blade rhythms are off. My technique's too sharp. Not clean. I need clarity." He studied her for a long moment. "The clarity," he echoed. "That why you haven't mentioned him?" Vivian's eyes flicked toward him, but she didn't answer as there wasn't a need. She didn't stammer a defense or denial. She simply watched him with those volute eyes of hers. Daniel understood her thoughts. He wasn't sure how. He just did. She wasn't running from Jinshun. She was trying to comprehend the parts of herself that still looked for him. "All right," Daniel said, exhaling. "Then I guess I won't see you until the Imperial Martial Tournament." Probably not. Unless you break seclusion early. I don't break things early. No, he said. You don't. He looked down at the silk-wrapped box she'd thrown him earlier, still unopened, sitting in his lap like a question. Vivian spoke before he could. You? He glanced up. Me? What will you be doing? He hesitated, then answered softer than before. Working on something, a project, something big, I think. If I'm right, it'll change how people understand martial inheritance. She tilted her head. Change how? The structure, he said. Foundation mapping. Technique synchronization across variable bloodlines. A framework for making cultivation empirical. She didn't blink. You're trying to build something repeatable, he nodded. Something reliable. Something that doesn't rely on luck or family legacy or good weather and waterfall enlightenment. Vivian's expression didn't change, but she listened. You think it'll work? She asked. I think it has to, he said. Another silence passed. Then she added more quietly. You'll be there? At the tournament? Daniel met her gaze. I will. I don't want the Lee name embarrassed. He smiled faintly. That would be a first. Vivian's lips twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. She turned her face back toward the window. And that's when he saw it. Sadness. Or the shadow of it. Something small but complex and real slipped into her expression like a heartbeat gone wrong. She wasn't crying, she wasn't frowning, but her jaw tightened. Her breath hitched. Once. Daniel kept his mouth shut. Didn't reach out because he couldn't fix it. Didn't ruin it by pretending he could. When the carriage slowed, she stood. He didn't follow right away, but slowly walked after her until they returned to their suite. She headed to her private area. At the door, she paused. She watched him and he her. She gave him a small smile and a raised eyebrow. Good night, Ethan. He returned the gesture. Good night, Vivian. Then she stepped down into the light of the estate, and the door clicked closed behind her. Daniel sat back, and for once he wasn't sure if he wanted the quiet.
Chapter 35. Vivian. The gates of the Lee estate opened before dawn. No ceremonial send-off. No dramatic speeches. Just a line of pale cloaked riders, a hovering supply cart, and the soft rhythm of hooves over dew-slick stone. Vivian rode at the center of the formation, flanked by May and 4 elite handmaidens. Each of them was armed, robed in silence, and alert. Not for threats, but for missteps. They would not embarrass their lady. Not today. Not on the road to Lotus Peak. The higher they climbed, the quieter it became. The wind sharpened. The light shifted. The cloud line blurred everything behind them into memory. It suited her, and yet her chest ached. Not sharply, not enough to stop her, but it had settled there, low and quiet. Between breath and bone. She hadn't said goodbye. Not properly. Ethan, still unreadable, still maddening, had walked her to the steps, had said nothing. And it wasn't indifference. She knew that now. It was restraint, and she didn't know whether to resent him for it or thank him. May rode behind her, quiet as ever. Vivian could feel the curiosity there, but no intrusion. May never pushed. They reached the first overlook by late morning. A flat plateau framed by whisper pines and a thin, frost-fed stream. Vivian raised a hand. Break here. May approached, voice low. We're 2 hours from the pass. I'll return shortly. No questions. Of course not. Vivian dismounted, her robe catching faint light as she turned from the trail and walked alone into the pine-lined slope that curved inward toward a familiar glade. She didn't plan this, but her feet knew where they were going, and so did her heart. Jin was waiting. He always was. Seated cross-legged on a low stone ledge, eyes closed, breath steady. Not meditating. Just waiting. Listening. The way he did when he wasn't sure she'd come. But hoped anyway. His head lifted as she stepped into the clearing. I thought I felt you, he said softly. Vivian didn't answer. She crossed the glade. The moss was cold beneath her boots, but clean. Unfiltered by politics or expectation. Jin rose slowly. No bow, no smile. But that look, the open one. Careful. Like he was trying to match her shape without assuming her need. I heard you were going up the peak, he said. 6 months? Maybe longer, she said. Clarity? He asked. She nodded once. He took a half step closer, not invading her space, just closing the air between them. You look tired. Vivian's brow twitched. I'm not. I didn't say you were weak. The silence stretched. She felt the ache press sharper behind her ribs. He saw it. You didn't come for a lesson, Jin said. You didn't come to say goodbye. Still, she didn't speak. I've seen that look twice, he added. Once when you asked for your father's blade. And the second? He stepped closer. Not a reach, just proximity. His fingers brushed the edge of her sleeve. Light. Familiar. The night before your wedding. Vivian's jaw set. But she didn't pull away. She didn't want to. She hated how steady he was. How easily he could still match her rhythm. How this place, this moment, felt like it had been waiting for her to arrive. Like she was the one who was late. I don't know what I'm doing here, she said. Jin's voice was quiet. You're searching. Then he kissed her. It wasn't the first time. They'd kissed before quiet, stolen moments on rooftops or inside training courtyards. It had always felt inevitable, charged, beautiful. But this time, it was different. Slower, softer, less need, more meaning. His hand cupped the side of her jaw, gentle, steady, and she kissed him back. Because part of her still wanted to. Because this was the last place she remembered being sure of herself. Because he still saw her the way she used to want to be seen. She didn't stop it. Didn't rationalize it. She just felt it. And for one breath, one flicker of stillness. She let it matter. When she pulled back, his hand didn't follow. He didn't chase her. Didn't try to hold on. He just stood there. Like he understood something they hadn't said aloud. Vivian touched her lips once. Not regretfully. Just to anchor herself. Then she turned. Walked away. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. She told herself it was closure. That she needed to let him go. But the truth was harder. Because she hadn't let him go. Not really. And she hadn't chosen Ethan either. Not yet. And as the cold wind of the Lotus Mountains wrapped around her like a second robe, the ache in her chest stayed sharp. Not because she was lost, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what she wanted. As the last bend of the trail disappeared behind her, Vivian emerged once more into the silence of her waiting retinue. No one asked where she'd gone. May simply stepped forward and handed her the reins. Vivian took them without a word. She mounted, settled, and for the first time since they left the estate, she looked back. Not at the path, not at Jin, at the clouds, at the sky she had left behind, at a house that didn't quite feel like hers, and a husband she hadn't chosen, but who somehow kept surprising her anyway. Ethan hadn't kissed her. He hadn't begged her to stay. He hadn't asked for anything. And yet, in the quiet of their last ride together, he'd offered something no one else ever had. Not loyalty, not admiration, not even love. Just space. A place where she could be herself without permission. A partner who would meet her blade for blade, silence for silence, and never flinch from the questions she didn't know how to ask. Vivian exhaled slowly. The ache was still there, but it was different now. Not weightless, not healed, just acknowledged. She looked forward again, toward the mountain peak, toward months of solitude and steel and discipline, and maybe, if she was honest, toward the day she would come back down and see what remained. Let's ride, she said. The riders obeyed. The wind rose, and the mountains kept their silence.
Chapter 36, Daniel. The lift hissed open, revealing a narrow corridor lit with mana-threaded sconces. Soft amber light pulsed along the baseboards, warm but functional. At the end of the hall stood a single door, double-sealed, reinforced, and marked with a sigil keyed to one soul. Daniel stepped forward. The enchantment stirred to life. A quiet pulse of energy swept over his skin, testing for discrepancies. Identity confirmed Ethan Joe. The lock unlatched with a whisper, and the door slid open. The lab wasn't what Daniel expected. Crystalline lights floated above modular workbenches, arranged with brutal efficiency. Glass walls shimmered behind containment seals. Conduits lined the ceiling like spiderwebs of polished copper, each one humming faintly with suppressed mana. This was a space of confidence, a sanctum carved from trust and ambition. Polished floors veined with jade, reinforced walls pulsing with mana sync arrays, projectors, alchemical mounts, and suspended drafting rings arranged with near-surgical intent. Even the lighting felt intentional, bright, white, clinical. Purpose, not vanity. "They gave you all this?" Daniel murmured. "Gave us this," Ethan corrected. "Don't forget it was you who earned their respect." Daniel continued walking, taking it all in. "Built with General Lee's blessing," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "Cleared through state channels, full Imperial catalog access. You don't build something like this for someone you want to contain. You build it for someone you believe in." Daniel's steps echoed faintly as he moved deeper. The air smelled of stone, ink, and filtered power, None of the cloying perfume of ceremonial halls. Just clarity. Not a lab, he said. A launch site. And a forge, Ethan added. This is where it happens. At the chamber's heart stood a central worktable heartstone slab, rimmed in containment alloy, layered with embedded resonance lines and induction glyphs. Daniel stepped forward and laid his palm on the surface. The miner responded, not welcoming, just recognizing. He swung the satchel off his shoulder and unwrapped a heavy bundle sealed in treated cloth. Scrolls, glyphstones, inked diagrams. Some new, others ancient. All of them recovered from Ethan's family home, not carried out of nostalgia, but because they mattered. This is it, Ethan said. My life's work, everything I discovered, and everything I never got to finish. When I first got back, I wrote down everything I could remember about my past life, my visions, that weird death walking. Everything. Daniel was slow to answer. We cannot let anyone else see that stuff. They'll think you're crazy. We're crazy. We are, kind of. Daniel didn't disagree. He placed the first glyph stone in the central ring. Light rippled outward. Threads of arcane energy curled into the air, linking to suspended projection rings above. Diagrams bloomed mid-air complex, half-finished, elegant. Ethan's handwriting flickered to life across spectral manuscripts, sharp and spare. We're behind already, Ethan murmured. If we're going to make a difference, we're already behind. The first time, I had to work meticulously alone, step by step. But this time, we don't have that luxury. Daniel began unrolling the rest careful, methodical. Scrolls by topic, glyphs sequenced for resonance pull. The lab's embedded readers synced one by one, each glyph lighting up as the systems absorbed and indexed the incoming work. We won't need as much time, Daniel said quietly. You've got resources now? We'll have help with testing and materials retrieval, but we still have to build this from scratch. Geez, what I'd give for access to ChatGPT. Overhead, the projection arrays flickered once, then stabilized. A slate of projects shimmered into being, tagged and hovering just above the table's surface. At the center, the integration project, the divine frame. Active surrounding it, bloodline harmonization, failed monophase drift study. Paused core containment stability map. In progress. Adaptive inheritance model. Archived. Daniel's gaze lingered on the first. So this is the one. It always was, Ethan said. This has the power to change our world. And if we're going to face what's coming, we have to change the world. Daniel looked at the waiting tools, at the arrayed scrolls, at the embedded glyphs slowly responding to their presence. Then let's finish it. And the lab, sensing its masters at work, hummed quietly to life. Daniel studied the scrolls for a moment longer, letting his fingers trace a line of unfamiliar script notes in Ethan's own hand, scribbled between diagrams. Some so hurried they nearly vanished into the parchment. He looked up at the softly glowing projection, the glyph light shimmering across the walls. Then he set his palms against the table's edge, leaned forward and murmured, Well, I guess it isn't alone anymore. They stood in silence for a minute, the hum of the lab the only sound. Daniel finally spoke. What went wrong, Ethan, the first time? Ethan didn't answer at first. It wasn't just one thing, not the fall of the Lee family, not Claire, not even the war. Daniel frowned. Then what? 1,000 little ones, Ethan said. Every time I ignored a decision, every moment I let someone else steer, every person I didn't help when I should have. It wasn't betrayal that destroyed us. It was erosion. And it wasn't just me. Daniel sat on the edge of the table. And now we stop the rot before it spreads. Daniel's gaze was hard. When does it start? Ethan was quiet. If I had to narrow it down, the first big crisis was at the Imperial Marshal Tournament. If we can change what happens there, we buy time and maybe avoid a rebellion that fractures the Empire. Daniel nodded slowly. We'll be ready. He turned back toward the console, hands moving across the surface, as the projection field realigned. Lights flickered, glyphs rotated. But before he could speak again, Ethan's voice cut through low, steady. There's something I haven't told you. Daniel stilled, didn't turn. All right. A memory, or rather, the absence of one. That made him look up. Ethan continued, There's a seal in my mind. Deep, buried, artificial. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What kind of seal? Not trauma. Not something I blocked out, a beat. It's deliberate. Precise. I can feel it like a locked chamber something inside me that was closed off. Intentionally. Can you see what's behind it? No. Ethan's voice stayed even, but the edges were clipped. It's not just missing. It's protected. Stabilized. Like someone didn't just hide it, they engineered the forgetting. Daniel folded his arms. So what does that mean? It means someone somewhere didn't want me to remember. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Daniel exhaled, slow and controlled. Then, there are only two reasons to do something like that. Go on. One, Daniel said, it's dangerous. Something you weren't ready for. Possible. Two, he continued, voice tightening, it's the kind of truth that ruins someone else's plan. Also possible. They stood in silence, the lab humming softly around them. Beyond the floating schematics and the light of the divine frame, something else had shifted quietly, like the first ripple in a still pond. Daniel turned back to the table. His eyes darkened. Then we figure it out. He tapped the framework glyph. Because if we can get this thing working, it won't just be a research project, Ethan said. It'll be a universal interface for progress. It could let anyone refine faster, train harder, ascend higher. Which makes it, Daniel said, the most dangerous weapon we could build, or the only one that can stop what's coming. The lab's core chamber pulsed with ambient light-cool blues and soft golds, radiating from embedded mana lines that ran across the stone like veins beneath skin. Daniel stood at the center projection table, scrolls and glyph stones surrounding him like pieces of code waiting to be cracked. Notes hovered in the air fragments of theory, cultivation schematics, core resonance charts. Most were dense, some were brilliant. One stopped him cold. It wasn't filed with the others. No header, no date, just a string of handwritten glyphs buried in the margin of a bloodline stabilization scroll. Daniel frowned. He brushed the projection rune and magnified the field. The schematic unfurled layered matrices of alchemical resonance, conversion loops, blood pattern harmonics, a dozen independent systems, each nested in impossibly tight synchronization. He didn't need the simulation overlays to know what this was, but he triggered them anyway. Data flared, ascension velocity, core saturation rates, breakthrough tolerances. And scrawled almost hidden, one set of initials, CW. Daniel's pulse jumped. The simulation lit up 12 breakthroughs in 14 months. No side effects, no friction, no deviation. Her elemental resonance wasn't cultivated. It had been sculpted, structured, made clean. She didn't ascend, Daniel whispered. You rebuilt her. A pause, then Ethan's voice. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Daniel didn't flinch. That wasn't medicine. That was a rewrite. It wasn't meant to be permanent. Daniel turned slowly. What did you use? A longer silence. Divine reagent. Mixed with my blood. Daniel's gaze darkened. You infused her full spectrum. Not at first. It started as a stabilizer. I was trying to preserve her meridians after the backlash from that prototype cycle. Daniel exhaled. You didn't just preserve her. You transformed her. Every limit she hit gone. Her path wasn't just open. You paved it. I didn't know it would go that far. But it did. Daniel stepped back, turning toward the heart of the lab, where projections of the framework spiraled faintly in the air. And now I know why the last timeline bent around her. You didn't just clear the path, you rebuilt the road. Ethan didn't respond immediately. It cost more than I thought it would. Daniel's fingers hovered above the glyph interface. So we refine it, stabilize it, make it accessible to anyone. Without the blood? With the framework, Daniel said. We don't brute force the solution, we build a translation layer. Ethan stirred. A divine interface. Daniel nodded. She became mythic. Let's make sure this time she's not the only one. The lab responded, low hums, shifting into alignment. A projection field opened wider. A new project tag appeared in the air. Framework Integrated Divine Path. Preliminary Design. Daniel leaned in. We start here. It won't be simple, Ethan warned. The framework's not just a technique. It's a system, a construct I tried to build from intuition and theory. But there were gaps. It was like trying to design magic flow with no array. The technology didn't exist yet. Daniel's breath hitched. Then he smiled. Oh my God, he said. You're a genius. You weren't designing around what did exist. What? Ethan's voice sharpened. You were designing toward what could exist. Daniel turned back to the console. You were trying to future-proof it, build a model that could adapt as the world changed. A living system that could absorb anything, bloodlines, divine resonance, even alien cultivation models. That wasn't the plan, Ethan said slowly, but that would explain why so many components stalled. Daniel tapped the crystal relay. It stalled because it was waiting for me. Silence. Then, let's get it working. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. No more chosen ones. Let's build a system that chooses back. He pressed his palm to the table, and the divine frame began to glow. Daniel watched the projections cycle. The framework's core lattice flickered, waiting for input. There's something else, Ethan said, quieter than before. You're not going to like it. Daniel didn't look up. Let's have it. A pause. You're going to have to seduce the imperial princess. The lab went still. Daniel blinked once slowly. You want to run that by me again? I'm sorry, Ethan said, but it's the only way. Daniel closed his eyes. Of course it is. He didn't curse, didn't laugh, just reached for the next glyph. Like nothing had changed. But something had, and they both knew it.